Hello, welcome to Mad Dodge Productions, and it may not be Sunday, but hey, better late than never. Um, this week we're gonna be talking about how do you say that? I'm gonna let you fucking pronounce that shit. Go ahead, MC, give it a go.
Is the Gaza campaign? Is that what you're talking about? Because that's what we're going to be talking
Is
about. Is
it
the Gaza
beersheba?
campaign?
Is it really beersheba? Like,
Beersheba.
It's it's Beersheba. It's the Battle of Beersheba.
I thought you said that you were raised Catholic.
yeah, but I mean, I just looking at that, it looks like it says beer Sheba, right?
Mm.
Yes, but that is how it's pronounced. It's pronounced Beersheba.
Yeah, for a country that really doesn't like their alcohol, geez, there's a lot of beer in a lot of their sayings, like tack beer and Beersheba, and
Well, I mean, beer was invented there's a debate whether or not it was truly invented in whether in Egypt or whether it was invented in Samaria in the Mesopotamian Valley. So,
mm,
personally, I think that it got invented in the Mesopotamian Valley because, like everything else, drinking water back then, when you didn't know about microorganisms, was a problem. But something about fermenting alcohol into your drink kind of cleared up a lot of that.
well, there's another thing about beer too, is that it's got the same caloric value as a steak. So if you have you get a couple of beers and a bag of chips, potato chips, and you're having chips and steak for dinner, effectively.
I'm sure that worked out really well because whether it has the caloric value or not, it definitely doesn't have the protein value.
Well, there was this thing about the people who built the pyramids. They actually used to use beer or mead as a form of food substance.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, and as a matter of fact, it was a trading commodity as well.
Mm. Anyways, to the subject at hand. Today is the Battle of Beersheba, and this will culminate in the one of the most famous and last successful cavalry charges of in history, pretty much. Done by the 4th Light Horse Brigade of Australia, which is where I'm doing a lot of the talking at the moment. Got anything to add, MC?
Yeah, you want to know what? Did you want the next slide?
No, we'll stay on this one for the moment.
Okay. So what you have here, and what you have in obviously you can see the British forces with the flags, all right, and then you can see the initial. This is the initial starting point, correct?
Yeah.
All right, and yeah, as you can see, you've got a group on the coastline. This is where Allenby, if I'm not mistaken, spent most of his time was with this group here, and they're presenting what they would call like a hammer and an anvil. This would be the anvil portion of it. They're not intended to move unless they're ready to exploit. And meanwhile, they try a flanking movement, right, which is the Australian component down below.
That's correct. Yeah, the main objective is to try and take Jerusalem, and initially they tried going through Gaza once in March and once in April, and those both attacks failed. And in the process, there the Ottomans, it's mainly the Ottomans with German officers at this point in time, had put in a massive defensive line that stretched out from Gaza to Beersheba, and the the light horse brigade was sent in to do a massive flanking maneuver. And in the night before the battle, the 4th light horse and the 20th infantry brigade of the British Army was sent to Beersheba. The British was supposed to attack from the east and the south, the west and the south, whereas the light horse and cavalry units were supposed to hook around at night and surprise them from the west.
Well, I mean, from a tactical standpoint. I mean, as far as this portion of it, it's a sound strategy. It's not necessarily a sound plan, but it's a sound strategy depending upon the terrain.
Yeah, another tactical advantage to this was it also captured the road to Hebron, which also leads into Jerusalem as well. So we're sort of cutting off a lot of their supplies at the same time.
Well, yeah, and also their routes to escape, forcing them to go, which is not a bad idea. You ready for the next one?
Let's see. Yes, just before this, though, there was a fellow called Richard Minarets-Hagen who did a thing called the Haversack Ruse. And this was a series of basically backpacks left with information for the Ottomans to find and the German officers to find, which basically said that the attack was mainly going to happen in Gaza. And this actually worked.
So basically, an early version of what they tried to do when they were trying to fool the Nazis during World War II, when they threw the poor body with a supposed fake invasion plan at the Pas-de-Calais and let it float into the Spanish waters, knowing that Spain would give it to the German attaché, right?
Exactly. So
that's pretty. I mean, I'll give you the British credit. They come up with some pretty innovative plans for this stuff.
Yeah, because you would think that wouldn't work, but then again, stuff like that really does happen. Just look at what happened to Lee's army. The famous cigar message.
There are a number of times. I mean, if you want to know the truth of the matter, the Germans really kind of screwed up during the Battle of Operation Market Garden. Even though they won, they actually did get the plans early on from one of the early glider drops where it crashed, and they had the entire plan. All right, that the British contingent was mounting against it. They just couldn't believe, the Germans for the longest time didn't believe that they were actually trying to do that. So
okay, all right. So on the morning of the 31st of October, the British started bombarding Gaza with a large artillery bombardment, which also gave the Germans and the Ottomans the idea that yes, the attack was happening there. Okay, if we can go to map 2.
Well, artillery, or was it the Royal Navy bombarding from the Mediterranean?
No, this is the Royal Artillery. This is field artillery. Because if they decided to put ships in, they'd basically be giving the game away a little bit too early. Because when you can't just sort of sail a ship up, and that takes a little bit of time. You can see them coming.
Where does this thing go? Hold on a second. It would do this to me at this point.
And it's all right, Falcon. We're a day late anyway, so I get it if you have to work or something. No problem. This is kind of Farty's specialty here on this episode, right? If we're talking about you Aussies.
Yeah, basically. Okay, so this is Beersheba, and its main defining feature is it's rather flat, except for to the west here where you see these arrow-headed squiggles, and that's Tel El Saba, and that's a high point there, and it overlooks the entire battlefield. And this is a point where they'll want to take first. And as you can see, with all the depression marks, there's wadis, which are dried up riverbeds and things like that. And the whole point of taking Tel El Saba at the beginning was not only to defuse the high points and defensive positions there, but there's also supposed to be a water source, and this will come in very important later on in the day.
Yeah, but aren't the Turks poisoning every water source that they pass by as they retreat? Right?
Not at this point.
Well, they're not retreating at the moment. I mean, this is their own water supply at the moment.
And they didn't really get a chance to sort of retreat at this point in time, as you'll find out at the end of this. They, yeah. Anyway, so to the west, you can see they've got some trench lines moving down around to the south, and this is where the British 20th Corps will come in and do a conventional infantry attack there.
Is it right here, or do they also try and jump up through here?
Yep. Basically, it's the entire west down around to the south.
Okay, so they're trying to do this entire come in from both this point here, hit this right here, and underneath, correct?
Yep, and the main point of this attack is to basically convince the local commander that the main attack is coming from the west, and he's really not expecting anything to come from the east. Nothing is supposed to be coming from the north, which will be a bit to their detriment. Now, in the town of Beersheba itself, there are lots and lots of wells, and this also will come in to of great importance later on. Next map.
Let's see if this works this time.
So, well, no, I'm guessing you have. That's right. I took a look at the maps, so I'll wait a minute because you're gonna go through the actual battle here. But I think the pivot point of the Turkish defenses is gonna come in it's gonna be quite important, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. To the north is also the Judean foothills, which is also deemed as a defensive point, and we don't even really bother attacking that. So this is Tel El Saba. As you can see, it's a very low and high point. It's a fairly steep piece of terrain, and it is surrounded by nothing but pretty much flat ground. And
now, as you're looking at this, for people who are looking at this, this doesn't look to many people as that steep. Look, folks, this is a lot harder to climb up when there are people on top of that shooting down at you. All right, where you have no cover, you're out there in the open. So trying to climb up this with any kind of speed is extraordinarily difficult. I mean, because you're doing it on foot for all intents and purposes.
Well,
And it's
no,
all-
and didn't if I'm the Turks, I have artillery up there also. I mean, look at your view of the open field.
Okay, artillery is changing now. You got to understand this, man. So artillery is changing. It's no longer a direct fire weapon. So you really want your artillery at a spot where you can lob it over the top of this, because the people you'll have people up there that are spotting where it lands, and then telling the fire control teams, okay, how to adjust the fire.
We also want your arcing fire to fire down on top of them, because firing up at a target is much more harder than firing down a target. And there's a reason why, in general, if there is high ground, your machine guns in a firefight would typically try and get to higher ground to try and provide fire support down onto an enemy below.
Right,
and
but with artillery, if you sit up there and try to put artillery up here, you would have to try and put it on a downward slope. But the problem with putting artillery on a downward slope and a direct fire kind of a methodology is you have very little capability to adjust fire now. Mm-hmm. So you can't hit, for example, if there's troops out in this area you want to hit, if your cannons are pointing down this way, they'll never get to hit them. All right. So you can't have them there. So you really don't. You got to be careful where you put the artillery in. And like I said, things have changed now. The artillery commands have changed, and now it's more indirect fire rather than direct firing weapons like they were in the Civil War.
Okay. Yeah, no, I understand. And once again, that's why you guys are leading the World War I streams, because I know way more about the Civil War than I do this war. That's for darn sure.
Well, but it shows you one of the major changes and innovations as things develop. Okay, and as things have changed. And even though there's a piece of technology that we've never really talked about that has changed this dynamic as well, and that is the telephone. Believe it or not, the telephone makes a major difference in communications. And in one sense it helps, but in another sense it creates a false sense of security for the commanders, because the commanders, when you first run the field wire, and you're basically running wire to these forward points, right? And so you're getting reports from these forward points up into the point where the wire gets cut. And so as long as things are stable and nobody's doing a whole lot, you're relaying information on a constant basis. It's really good, but it's so easy just to have an artillery shell come down and cut the wire in the back, and all of a sudden now you've locked communications out from the command. The command all of a sudden loses communications. So it's something that is wonderful while they have it, but they just can't keep it operational during battlefield movement.
True, but since it's so new, then the British still had the signal corps, right? So they could still run flags to signal.
As soon as you become out in front of people, if people can see you, you wiggle a flag, you're catching rounds.
Mm-hmm.
No one's using signal corps that way anymore. No
And
one.
there is a telephone line that runs along the road to Hebron, which will be attacked by the Commonwealth forces later on in the battle, or later on in this episode, anyway. Okay, so what to map 4, please.
Okay, give me a sec here. For some reason,
And how big is the top of that hill? Because it does plateau, it looks like. How big of a space? How many troops could you fit up there?
Quite a few in the trench lines that they had. It's not a very big space of land. I think I believe it's under a square kilometre, or it's like a third of a square mile or something like that. Okay, so the forces now. This is the Ottoman forces. They're led by a fellow called Ismet Bey, or Ismet Bey. He's the Turk commander. They do have some German officers there, but most of the local forces, mainly farmers and locals, but they are very passionate about their defence of the Ottoman Empire. And as you can see here, there's not very many. He's only got a couple of cavalry units and a few infantry units, and some units up the top right of the screen as their reserves. But they have aircraft, and these things can drop bombs.
Well, I mean, but they're really old style airframes. I mean, these look
look at it.
Don't they?
No, but look at it. That actually looks like a fucking bird. That's cool. I want one.
Well, yeah. A lot of designs earlier on did try and mimic nature.
Well, it would only make sense if you got a flying creature to try and mimic it, right?
Mm-hmm. But these aircraft will prove rather effective during this battle, especially when in the actual the instance of trying to take it Tel El Saba.
Yeah. Now, another thing that you mentioned, right, and that I think most people can't understand is the presence of the German officers. Under normal circumstances, having a foreign officer over you, all right, for example, having foreign officers in charge of British forces or American forces, all right, always tends to lower morale, all right. However, in this case, all right, in these cases, the Turkish troops were far more trusting of the German officers than they were of their own officers in their own military. And they had a lot more confidence in what they were saying and what they were doing.
Yeah, the main point was that the German officers were a lot more competent and experienced than a lot of the Turkish officers, and that's the main reason why they were there in the first place.
Well, a lot of the Turkish officers have their rank through some form of corrupt nepotism or something along those lines, and they were horrible leaders. You know, there were some good Turkish leaders. I'm not going to say that all Turkish leaders were useless, all right, but many of them, you know, came from the corrupt, you know, regime of the Ottoman Turks, and they were, quite frankly, they were a bigger detriment to their own troops than the British forces trying to kill them.
Yep. Okay, so I think you might have skipped one here. There's another map that looks exactly like this. That's got all blue icons, and there's a lot more of them.
I may have missed it. Then I may have forgotten it. So I'm sorry because I don't see it. This isn't it.
Wait one. Oh, that's a comparison of the forces. So This is basically the numbers of the troops that we have at the time. The British had 50,000 riflemen, whereas the Turks only had 4,400. The British had 150 machine guns, whereas the Ottomans only had 60. And the artillery in the 20th Corps, there was 12 4.5 inch howitzers and 18 pounders. Now, the difference between the howitzers and the 18 pounders is the 18 pounders are mainly more field guns. They're more a direct fire kind of a weapon, whereas a howitzer is designed to lob shells at a high trajectory and fire over the tops of things. The desert force, which is the light horse and the cavalry, they came along with 44 13 pounders, and the Turks all up had about 28 field guns. Now, the advantages, we've got the surprise and mobility, whereas the Turks have got air support, which I mentioned it was pretty effective. They've got well-developed trench lines. They've got good fields of fire over open ground. And the most important, they've got the water supply. Okay. Next.
Which is quite critical when you're marching on this stuff, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah.
Is this your next one?
Yep. Okay, so the map on the you can see that there's actually a petition down the center of these maps. That's better. Now the map on the right, the left, is the Battle of Gaza, and this is the red arrows is basically where the elements of the British, the Allenby's forces will be attacking during that day, which is a bit inconsequential to us at the moment. But
well, this is kind of like a spoiling. This is not a spoiling attack, but this is kind of like a cover attack, right?
Yeah, it's a diversion. And so the map on the right, you'll see a red arrow pointing towards the conversion point of all the wadis and roads and whatnot. That's British 20th Corps.
Right
that's
here.
Yep, that's correct. Yep, that's the main infantry attack, which is a conventional infantry attack supported by artillery. These guys basically do a foot charge on foot. Now, the long arrow that goes along the bottom of the screen and then back towards the conversion points, yep, those two. This is what we did the night before. So we moved a lot of our horses and cavalry, artillery and machine guns and whatnot up to, what's that fucking road there? Well, the end of that long arrow. And our movement during the day will basically be that second arrow moving towards, that's actually pointing towards Tel El Saba.
I can't read that. I'm sorry, it's kind of blurry.
Yeah. Well, basically, where we've moved with all the horses and whatnot, the Turks had no idea until about halfway through the battle that the forces that we were sending in were so large. So that's where we had the element of surprise there.
What time in the morning did this kick off?
The battle commenced at 05:55.
Right, so around twilight.
Yep, that's correct. That's when troops started actually moving. It started with artillery fire on the western trenches. So that's where the 20th Corps has gone in. Yep, that's correct. And yep. And if we go to the next map.
Okay.
So when cavalry was approaching, they were actually marching and just leading their horses, right? They're not riding through the desert like that.
Oh no, they're riding. Now we can see here the displacement of the 20th Corps on the left, where they've got up north. There's a camel cavalry unit plus several infantry units, and the main attack is that's the three up the top left, and then you'll see a line.
This is like you're the dromedary group, huh? So it's charging on camels.
Yeah. Oh, they're mainly like support and logistics, like a mule train.
Oh, okay. Okay. So
and you'll see this
more of a logistical support.
That's correct. You see the long line of infantry units with the 3 artillery units just below those. They're the units that are moving on foot, being supported by those artillery units.
Okay, so but before we go any further, I want to explain something. You see where these X's are to everybody? This is an indication of an infantry group or an infantry command. The circle, the filled-in circle, that's an artillery, and obviously cavalry is the horses. All right, but wherever you see the circle dot, that's an artillery unit. So that people understand when you talk about artillery, so they can place it where it's at.
Mm-hmm. And
it doesn't look like there's a lot. They didn't do a very good job in this map of showing you where the field guns were for the Turks, does it?
No. Well, it's kind of fairly inconsequential where they were. They were rather ineffective.
Well, I mean, they do show you the airfield. I mean, here's the airfield right here.
Yeah. Well, that was important. They were effective.
Okay.
Okay, so at about this point too, a fellow called Newcomb takes some scouts north to cut the road from Beersheba to Hebron,
And
in doing so,
that's this road right there, right?
That's correct. And in doing so, they take charge of the phone line there and cut it. Okay. Next map.
Okay.
That should have a red dot around Tel El Saba, or red square around Tel El Saba.
Right here.
That's the fella. So some of the scouts have figured out that, yes, there is an amount of cavalry that's moving around to the west, and Ismet's gone and sent an infantry unit up into Tel El Saba to cover the eastern approaches. And the British 20th Corps are still moving in under artillery fire.
So at this point in time, though, the entire Turkish force is really more focused on this front right here, where the battle lines are taking place. Correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Right, and then it isn't until much later that all of a sudden they get a report from this lookout point that there's a massive force coming from behind.
Mm-hmm. Now, at about 0700, the artillery on the western front stops for a bomb report, basically for 40 minutes. The 8th, the 8th Light Horse and the 7th Cavalry, which are down at the south, and they'll be attacking the 2 units to the south that aren't encumbered yet, but they're basically repelled.
Basically, these units down here get pushed
That's
back.
Correct.
They hit this line here and get shoved back.
Yep, that's correct. Okay, next one.
Okay. This is what you wanted, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Yep. The 7th as it tries to come in.
Right, now if you have a look at the west, the 20th Corps have moved mostly into the trenches.
Okay, so this was actually then successful. The bombardment of these trenches was actually successful and actually drove them back.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, you see, like we've been talking about the problems with artillery and their ineffectiveness, and then they start learning things like walking fire and supporting the troops properly and all this kind of stuff. This is another instance of where you can see that like they've learnt their lessons and they're actually utilising things properly. However, the 180th and the 231st Infantry Battalions are in fact pinned down by machine gun fire and don't actually make it to the trenches until slightly later. And then you'll see over at Tel El Saba.
Right there.
That's correct. There's one at the bottom and the one at the top that's lagging behind.
Oh, okay. Is that the 231st?
231st down the bottom and the 180th up the top.
Okay. So basically they've created a kind of a bulge, in a way, right through here, correct?
Effectively, yeah. They will eventually make it to the trenches. It's just that they're basically pinned down at this moment, and there's not much anyone can do about it. And at the same time, over in the east, the New Zealand Light Horse is starting to move on Tel El Saba.
Okay, so they're going to actually try to charge up this ridge.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I you got to do what you got to do. I understand that, but whoa, that's not a point that I would. It's not a strong point I want to assault this way.
At this point, too, they've realised that there may be a large sweeping flanking attack, which might come back down the Beersheba Road from Hebron, which is where what's his name, Newcomb is situated up there now. And you can see him at the top of the screen. There's the 2nd Cavalry Unit. Yep, that fella there. And Ismet has gone and sent a couple of cavalry units to try and either head that off or block that from attack.
So basically, what they're worried about is them not just holding this line. They're actually worried that what they're going to do is just come streaming into here and hit them from behind, or just pivot down here and hit this and basically surround it.
That, and also too that it cuts their communications, and it also basically cuts their retreat and any resupply or reinforcement. So at this point too, the Germans have gone off to their commanders and said, "Yep, we need reinforcements," and they've been told there's none available. Stiff shit, you're gonna have to handle it yourselves.
How are they supposed to handle it, though? You said 4,400 riflemen compared to how many do the Brits have?
50,000. But that's, at this point, the Turks aren't really aware of this entire cavalry formation that's down here at the bottom left, bottom right of the screen.
All they see now is just a couple of cavalry. These units right here are the only ones that they've seen so far.
Yeah,
they haven't seen this moving up the wadi and what's going to hit them with this.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, they're completely unaware that there's 2 artillery units and a hell of a lot of horsemen over here. They're basically thinking that the main attack is coming from the west, and the main reason why they've put people up on Tel El Saba is, well, it's just covering your flanks pretty much. It's the standard operating procedure, effectively.
Well, it's a high point. You're always going to try and take the high point if for no other reason to have maximum view of the battlefield. All right, mm-hmm. And I'm sure that from the way this thing looked, it had views all the way through this area here. You would normally put somebody up there because of its ability to view things.
Yeah, and you would put people up there anyways because, well, not just to cover your flanks, but yeah, it would fire onto the attacking infantry on the other side, and they'd probably just assumed at that point in time that the New Zealanders coming up with their horses would just basically to try and quell or distract the forces on Tel El Saba from providing support.
Instead of this being the diversionary mover, they're thinking that this is what it is. This is the diversion.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is, I mean, so far the British plan is working well overall.
Mm. Oh yeah. Oh, it's deemed as working like a charm. In ways of modern militaries and all this kind of stuff, it still was pretty bloody and not that much of a success, and it did come down to the wire at one point.
The thing is that these things in the defense, all right, while you're in those trenches, you're delivering punishment, and you're seeing it right now. All right, this is a single infantry unit, and yes, it's getting attacked by an artillery piece and three large sections of the cavalry, and
okay.
Right.
Yep. So this is about 10:00 in the morning, and the 10th Light Horse have moved up to support the Kiwis at Tel El Saba. The 231st Infantry Battalion finally get to their trenches, and then their supporting artillery moves up from the west.
Right, and unfortunately, the 180th is still pinned down.
That's correct. Yeah. Now in the east, the Inverness battery
Now, why has the 181st? Why has it retreated? Is it just trying to redeploy along these lines? Because it looks like it's pulled back from the previous slide. Let me go back to the previous slide. All right, which should have been this one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they just I take that back. It just looks like they've held position, but this one has moved back to try and refuse the line.
They've probably come back to try and support the 180th, help them get into their lines. Well, they've already taken their trenches, so you can go back and send forces back to bolster because you've already taken a defensive position then. Yeah, so not that one. Not that
Let me
one.
get back to what is happening to my? Oh, they're being bounced up here. I don't know why.
Yep, that's the fella.
The chat. What the fuck does cavalry do to a trench? Jump over it or run alongside it? You know, that's a good question.
Yeah, you
like
jump
that.
over it and you dismount after you've crossed their lines pretty much, and in hand-to-hand combat and things like that. Jump in the trenches and whatnot. The whole point is to get your infantry past their defensive points and in amongst their lines. And once you get in there amongst their lines, you can cause lots of confusion and havoc and all this kind of stuff. When you're up close and personal, you can't really swing your machine guns around.
The idea is basically with cavalry is to move quickly, right? And that's exactly what they've done here, to be honest. Because what they've done is, yeah, you got the infantry here, but the cavalry has already made this big, wide, sweeping movement. Right, so it's already used the horses to the effect that you want to use the horses for. Now, unfortunately, at this point, modern weaponry makes the further exploitation than what they used to do with the horse, which is what they used to do is with the horses they'd then pin back and then they'd come in from an attack. But of course, horse flesh against machine guns is a lot different than horse flesh against muskets.
Yep. So also here we have at Tel El Saba, the Inverness battery becomes online, and the Somerset battery is starting to has moved up on Tel El Saba to provide support for the Kiwis. And at this point here, the Germans use their air support to start to try and break up this attack on Tel El Saba, and this causes quite a few casualties. So this is where I say that the air cover was actually quite effective for its time. It did basically halt this attack for a good few hours. And on the western side of the battlefield, the 3 artillery units over here, they've basically started attacking this second trench line where you can see the 2 Turkish units on the west.
Which is right here.
So,
No.
Oh, you're talking about here?
Yeah, the 3 artillery units on that side is the two Turks that moved closer to Beersheba. They're
moving out. Is that what you're saying?
Not at this point in time. They're basically sitting in the trenches, but it's the artillery that are attacking the Turks.
Well, they've attacked. They're sitting in these trench lines, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Got the artillery behind them, and the Turks have pulled out of these trenches and then down to the
retreated.
Second line, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
But this
so
unit,
I do have a question real quick before you continue. How many? I know there's probably not any stats on this, but I'm sure a lot of horses were lost. Weren't these cavalry guys really, really attached to their fucking horses? Right?
Yeah, I was actually going to get into that a little bit later, where it becomes a bit more relevant. But yes, you are right. Yes, these the light horsemen and all this kind of stuff. A lot of these guys were horsemen, especially the Australians. We basically pulled our light horse brigades off blokes who were jackaroos and basically cowboys and whatnot, our version of cowboys. And that was actually a big thing at the time back here. It was like no cars and anything. Everybody had a horse. My grandmother used to tell me about she used to go to school on a horse. Back when she used to live out at, where was it? I can't remember now. So a lot of people were horsemen and all this kind of stuff, and their horses were their horses. They lived, they slept, they ate with them and all this kind of stuff. And we'll get into the water situation later on. A lot of the Australian light horse guys actually were giving up their water ration for the horses in the lead up to this. Okay, next map.
Okay.
Another thing I noticed while he's finding the other map, once the Brits took the first set of trenches, there really isn't that much of of trench works here, really. So
Well, you
I
have
don't know.
natural.
If
You
you're
have natural
Turkey at
things
this
there.
point, after you lose the first trenches, don't you pull out of the city? I
No,
guess we
no.
can get to
No.
that at the end.
Take a look right here, man. See all this
It's
right
layered
here?
defense.
This makes a nice natural position. You don't need to put trenches in there. Okay, this makes a nice natural kind of like little barrier here. So that's what you're seeing is they're using the terrain to their advantage.
Oh, okay, I understand. See, I thought that was showing underground wells. I didn't know that was actually like a river flowing through there.
Okay, hold it right there. Yep. Okay, so at this point here, we can see the 20th Corps have now started to move up on the second line of trenches. The was it the 200 or sorry, the 180th regiment finally get into their trench lines. The 231st basically hold their positions there and start providing covering attacks for the units moving up from the south that the New Zealand's were going to.
Well, it looks like the 180th here had to pivot.
Yeah, they did.
South. In order to avoid they must have been taking a hell of a beating right here.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, before you move on, then, first, Bobby B in the chat says, "I come for the shit talking and stay for the maps." Well, thank you. But trying to pivot your line like that under fire, in World War I, much less, that had to be a pretty hard maneuver, even for a slight pivot, right?
Well, at that point in time, they were basically pinned down in open terrain. Now, there's two things you can do: get the fuck out of there, or start digging to China.
It's pretty succinct, but yeah, that's accurate. Basically, the idea was to get the hell out of the way, and it looks like most of the fire was pouring down to them from this area right here, because it looks like this was their initial assigned area to take, and what they basically did was say, okay, we can't take it; it's too difficult, so let's just follow in as the rest of the attack goes, and they become like a reserve. Get pulled up as a reserve unit.
Yeah, a lot of them got chewed up pretty bad, so they're mainly taking care of wounded and all this. And you'll probably find too that any of the wounded from the rest of the 20th Corps are now being looked after by these guys, whether moved to aid positions or treated on scene.
I would like to point something out. The 48th Turkish unit, they're getting flanked right now, right? They're screwed.
Well, they're getting moved upon. They are getting flanked as well. So you'll find that the 129th is providing covering fire for the 241st. It's attacking the 48th.
This is all part of the 48th responsibility, and they're getting.
Yeah, no, I could just
they're
see
becoming.
though.
They're becoming getting pressed.
Yeah, but you can see the position of the units, though. They're gonna get wrapped up. The 48th might as well just surrender. Sorry, Turks.
Well,
not just yet.
See this right here? Do you know what this is? This is a railroad cut. This is basically a railroad point. So they have the ability, if they do this, if they can get to the railroad, they can get out. All right, they have a platform to march from, kind of like a road. If they can get to the road, they can get out. Now, if like the 230th or the 229th had rushed up here to try and cut this off, they may have had a chance. But look at where this road is. If you push a unit right into this road, it's in a nice open field, and it can get massacred. And that's what everyone's trying to avoid. You get into the open, you get the shit kicked out of you.
Well, that's the thing. There's pretty much nothing but open ground at this point in time. So, yeah, there are slight depressions with the waddies and stuff that give you some cover from cover fire and all this kind of stuff. But it's you still got to cross the ground between each of these low points. Okay, so next map. Right now, here the Turks on the western side have retreated back into the town, and now they've got buildings and alleys and all sorts of stuff that is making this attack basically halt here. So the 20th Corps will effectively just pretty much sit here and block from now on.
About what time of day is this now?
We're looking at about midday, 11 o'clock midday about this point.
So the battle's been going on now for about 5 hours.
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah, is that cavalry unit that's trying to take the ridge? They're pinned down, right? I haven't seen in any slide that unit move an inch.
Well, actually, Tel El Saba.
This unit here is what you're talking about, Mad Dodge?
Maybe it moved a little bit and I didn't notice, but yeah, it looks like they're pinned down on that ridge line.
No, that's a block.
They're a holding group.
They're holding the road. They've got one of the routes out. They're preventing any kind of escape or any kind of usage along that road line. That's what they're doing. They're holding that line.
I understand.
Yeah, they're doing their job. They're all right. Yeah. So the 241st at the bottom of the map have taken their initial trench lines, and Ismet's gone and bolstered his eastern attack because he's finally figured out that, oh shit, there's a lot of bloody horses over there. And Tel El Saba has finally been taken.
Which is this area right here. Now, what was the loss like taking this high point? I bet it was pretty severe.
It was pretty heavy. I've got final figures, but not for that specific part of it. And this is about 1 o'clock in the afternoon now. The 3rd Light Horse has been sent in to support Tel El Saba, and shortly after that was taken. And it's at this point here where they realise that, oh shit, there's actually no water at Tel El Saba, and this is where the whole point of the water has become really important, because, like I said, the mounted infantry guys have been giving their water rations to the horses because they were in fact out of water. And most of the point of taking Beersheba was because it does have water points. It's got wells inside the town and all this kind of stuff. So we're looking at like mid-afternoon in the heat and all this kind of stuff. They're 48 hours now without water, and things are getting pretty desperate. And this is about the point where they've realised, right, we've now got to actually make a fucking real decent push for the town.
You got to try and take the town now, but you've pushed them out of the bulwarks here at least. At least have shoved them out of the trench work, which is good. Several of your units look like they've been mauled, which is why they're staying there. The 231st has at least dislodged the 3rd or the 48th out of their positions, so that's a positive.
With all the numbers that they've had, it's at this point here where it's the 4th Light Horse is the only real effective infantry sort of unit that's actually capable of making an attack at this point.
This unit here?
Yep.
Well, now this unit has been basically sitting back this entire time. They've been, and I imagine it's because of this nice field of fire right here. They've been avoiding trying to go across.
Yeah, and that's 5 kilometers or about 2.5 miles of completely open terrain. And that Turkish unit that's holding those trench lines there, they've got the artillery, most of the artillery and most of the machine guns. And for that point, because of the openness of that terrain, it just lent itself to great defensive positions for modern weapons. So the decision has been made. They're going to send the Light Horse in to do a full-on charge, and
so
they cover
double breastwork. They're going to do a full-on charge straight into this.
Yep, over 5 kilometers of completely open terrain, and it wasn't a thing of dismount, cover fire, then mount and move. This was just basically they started at a trot. And then at one point, the order was given to charge, and they just made a flat-out movement straight towards those lines.
Yeah.
And they overcame those lines. They took relatively light casualties in doing so. They broke through and pushed into Beersheba itself.
Which we should see in this one here, right?
So, how many horse?
So they just bypassed it. They just left them there.
Yeah, ran straight over the top of the cunts. Like, some of them did stop, dismount, and start attacking them, but the large majority of the 4th Light Horse pushed straight into Beersheba.
Look at this.
Yeah. How many horse were involved in the charge? Because you said this is the last one, pretty much ever. How epic was this charge? Because if you're one of the people charging those double breastworks, you probably are thinking, I remember hearing about Pickett's charge. This isn't good.
Yeah. Well, we saw that and went, hold our beer. You can stick your muskets and your black powder cannons. We've got field guns and machine guns. Watch us go. So yeah, this movement from the 4th Light Horse was basically the death knell for the Turks. It broke the attack, it broke their defenses, and pretty much they all collapsed from that point on.
Well, yeah. Now it's going to turn into a freaking. These guys, this position is now untenable. All right, this position is obviously now untenable. These guys now are, their initial focus was completely on the side. Now have to deal with an intermixed unit intermix the city. Now it's going to just turn it into straight chaos.
And a bunch of pissed off Australians. So by 6:30 in the evening, 18:30, it was over. We'd taken Beersheba at that point, and as a result, we captured 78 officers. 1,458 other ranks, with less than 200 casualties on our side, from the 4th Light Horse and 12th Regiment.
So that wasn't too bad. But what was the damage done to the 20th? 20th infantry.
Yeah, they didn't give those figures.
Well, they're expendable. They're grunts, right?
Well, not in the reading matter that I was looking at. You could probably find those figures, but yeah, that the 20th Corps did take a fair amount of casualties. They were also encumbered too because they were moving on foot. They didn't have the luxury of traversing the ground as quick. I think you'll find on the western side those trench lines are actually a couple of kilometers apart.
Right, and why did they not move off of here? Why did they leave this whole unit? I mean, I realize that they're in a guarding position because they're worried about the logistical supply, right? But I mean, once you see the route take place, why not push forward to at least seize this line of communication?
Well, that's exactly what you said before with the whole the rail line. Is they're there basically to try and remove any reinforcements that were coming in by train, because they'd be on train. There'd probably be some form of armored cars and stuff like that with some heavy artillery and stuff. So you'd need a fair amount of forces to go and encounter something like that. And the camels, as I mentioned before, like the mule trains, so they're mainly your supply and reinforcement elements up there.
So basically, they just left them there to leave as reinforcements. Did the Turkish 48th units that were sit here? Did they just surrender at this point?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, so they held the line until the last man, and they became the last man, and they had to surrender, huh?
Well, it was more of a point that once the town had fallen, their officers and their command and control structure had depleted and stuff. There wasn't really much left for them to do. No. I
mean, you could, like you were saying before. Now all the water, the water being here, right, is all in the hands of the enemy. They're not going to get any kind of food supplies, not going to get any kind of ammunition supplies, and they're not going to get any water, which is quite important. And so now at this point, you can last maybe another 24 hours, but that's it.
Well, there is a
point when you're surrounded at that point.
Yeah, there is a point when you're in large battles like this where, the point does come where you have to make a decision where, look, all is lost, we've got two options. We can fight to the death, or we can just try and save me blokes and hopefully surrender and not get fucking summarily executed by the enemy and all this kind of stuff and treated nastily. And you'll find that that's mainly the point there. The command and control structure had basically dissolved. Their supplies and logistics are dissolved. There's no support coming. They're basically dead if they don't surrender.
At that point, you've got to make a decision as a commander whether or not you serve any useful purpose. All right.
Yeah.
There are times when making that last stand, all right, to the last man stand, is important. All right. If you're there doing it, and you can cause the enemy to delay the enemy, all right, in a critical time to let more people escape. But once you're surrounded, are you serving any purpose? In this kind of environment, it looks as if you're not really serving any kind of purpose. The guys who escaped have already escaped. No one else is going to be escaping. You might as well at that point just go ahead and surrender.
Yeah, and now we've got all your machine guns and your artillery and all this kind of stuff, and we can just simply focus everything on you. So
yeah, that becomes a problem. That becomes problematic when all the enemy's forces concentrate on you, and you're not really able to do a whole lot aside from take a pounding.
Well, it's also pretty disconcerting for these guys too when you consider they've just watched a cavalry charge succeed against modern weapons and stuff like that, and that didn't stop them. So what are they going to do?
Well, yeah, I mean,
what the Turkish, what is that? The 3rd Cavalry, that's been sitting there for the whole fight. Do they just turn and run?
I'm not entirely sure whether they escaped or whether they just surrendered or anything like that. Yeah, I'm not sure. Not sure what happened to them.
How long did the British and Australian forces hold the city? Till the duration of the war, or
yeah, at this point
they sack the city and move on?
At this point, yeah, they'll move on from that because they're pushing the forces back, and the whole point is to take Jerusalem. That's the ultimate goal in this campaign.
But they got what they were looking for, right? Fresh water, resupply, and move on.
Yeah, fresh water, resupply, outflank the enemy, put them on the back foot. Now they're retreating, so there's no real point in keeping and holding this town when the enemy is nowhere near you anymore and they're actually moving away.
Okay, well, we'll get to the lasting effects of this battle later if they ended up taking Jerusalem, which I believe you guys did. So
yeah, but let's talk about this for a moment because this is the screen the screen that I couldn't show. All right, these are the forces. Remember, and I wish I could pull both of them up at the same time. These are the forces that the British had. Look at these are full divisions in comparison to what the Turks had at that same time. This was the Turkish force.
So like I said,
yeah, you can say they were.
This is what they brought against them.
Yeah, we outnumbered them 3-1. However, like I did mention, the Turks did have quite a few advantages to their side, like the water points, the defensive positions, and air cover.
You brought in 12 infantry brigades, 3 artillery brigades of just the 20th Corps alone. Meanwhile, you bring in 5 mounted infantry brigades, 5 cavalry brigades, and 3 artillery brigades. And then, of course, the Camel Brigade, which you saw set at the back, which is just a dromedary version. But that's a pretty despair. You would have thought that they would have just hit this and ran right through it. You know?
Hey, I was right. It was the 3rd Cavalry Division. Sweet. Hey, got that one right.
Yeah, so that's what happens when the Aussies and the Kiwis work together.
But it still took you all day to sit there and get to that point, right?
Oh yeah. Well, it was an evolving battle too. Like the 4th Light Horse was never a plan from the beginning. That charge was never a plan from the beginning. It was we were hoping that taking Tel El Saba and then the 20th Infantry Corps moving in would do most of the work. And the 4th Light Horse was an actual act of desperation. at that point because of the water situation. They really couldn't afford to wait for another day to continue the attack in the next morning.
And that's one of the things about desert warfare is water. Controlling water is critical. He who controls the water wins, right? And if you can keep control of your water, you win, right? Because the enemy, there's not water everywhere, you know. I mean,
well, no, don't we have whole units now that are just water trucks, pretty much?
well, in logistics now is far more important. For example, in the United States military, for every infantry soldier, you have 10 support units. You have 10 soldiers in support.
Yeah, it's not infantry officers that win battles typically. It's the logistics officers that do the most work because they're the forward-thinking guys. Right, we're going to send in 1,000 troops. Right, what do we need to support those 1,000 troops? We'll need 500 body bags. We'll need 1 million rounds of ammunition. We'll need 3 artillery units. We'll need air support. We'll need food supplies. We'll need uniforms. We'll need fucking medical supplies. We'll need fucking ambulance units, fucking helicopter transports, and fucking all sorts of other shit. Whereas the infantry officer is really just more predisposed to, there's the bad guy, bang bang.
The lieutenants study tactics, generals study logistics. That's an old saw, but it's very true. Because the army moves, ever since the days of Napoleon, they've learned that the army moves on its stomach. You have to feed and you've got to clothe and water the troops. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. You can have as mmany troops as you want. It doesn't freaking matter at that point. If you can't feed and you can't supply your troops, you're done. And
there's like things like, say, with the best example in the world is the Sherman tank. It lent itself to being supported so well because of all of the supplies and all this kind of stuff. It wasn't the best tank. It was obsolete quite early in the war, but it was easily repaired. You could fuel it up quite easily. The logistics train and all this kind of stuff was very easily sort of constructed around the Sherman tank. It can be off in the Pacific, but you'll still have supplies for it. You can still get fuel for it. All the engines are the same, so you can pull parts out of other tanks and this, that, and the other thing. And it's what the Germans didn't really sort of take much notice in with their mainly like the Panther and the Tiger II and stuff like that, where they were more technologically advanced for their own good, and they didn't have the supplies and stuff to keep them running. So a lot of those tanks actually were abandoned on the battlefield because they simply broke down before they even got in the gunshot of the enemy. So I think it was Patton that said, "My men can starve, my horses can rot, but my tanks need fuel."
Yeah, absolutely. And so, what's the next battle we're going to talk about next week? Are we going back to our normal month by month format?
Is Cambrai?
Yeah, I think we need to talk about Cambrai. I think we really need to, which takes place around the same time frame, but on the Western Front.
Sounds good to me.
And it's an important battle because of what will happen, what could have happened, what did happen. Yes, in many ways it was a great victory, but was it really? But why? Okay, I mean, there's a lot to talk. There's a lot to unpack in it.
All right, sounds good. Tomorrow I'll be doing episode 5 of Star Trek Picard, the review with Nerd, formerly Voice of One. He hates it. I'm not the biggest fan. We'll go through it, guys. Any last thoughts on this battle?
Well, it did open the way to Jerusalem, just not at the speed that Allenby was looking for, right?
Well, it was a large success in the way that it did break that line. It gave him Gaza, it gave him Beersheba. It started pushing the Turks backwards. It dislodged them from the Middle East pretty much.
This opened the way to Jerusalem. This basically was the road to Jerusalem. It's now open for the British to actually take it, right, and kick the Turks out of Jerusalem, which was the big prize.
Yeah, that's correct too. It wasn't the be all to end all. It was just one footnote in the entire campaign. There's lots of other things like with the Lawrence of Arabia and all that, bringing up the Arabs, the Arab uprising, and all this kind of stuff. There's a lot more to it, but yeah, it was a quite a pivotal point.
Well, at this point, we probably should talk about Lawrence of Arabia a little bit too, because Lawrence at this point is trying to manage his Arab allies, and he had to get them to understand that they were never going to get Jerusalem, and because that it being the big prize, everybody wanted it, including his Arab allies. They were initially very put off that the British were saying, no, you are not getting Jerusalem. You're going to have to settle for something else. And Lawrence of Arabia was able to convince them, okay, you understand you're not going to take Jerusalem, but at least we can take Damascus, right? Which is the second big prize that everyone was looking toward. And so that you begin to see the big push of the Arabs toward Damascus.
And the large issue there is that, like, a lot of people think that, like, oh, Iraq and Afghanistan, well, not bloody Afghanistan, fucking Iran and Syria and Saudi Arabia and all this kind of stuff. These were countries that were invented by us. We made the borders for it. And before then, and this is what T.E. Lawrence had to face, was that it was still a very, very tribal society. That, there's the reason why there's so many bloody kings and princes in the Middle East is because, well, they're kings and princes in their own little sort of areas and stuff like that, and their areas intersect borders that we've put in. So we had to get, Muhammad so and so to get friendly with Ahmed Mahok and Dahaha. They've been typically fighting over their own terrain for hundreds and thousands of years. You have to try and get them to be friendly to combine all of their forces and whatnot, and lots of other tribes, and put their differences aside to fight the Turks, and that was a bloody phenomenal effort in itself.
Well, the idea that Lawrence was able to convince them that there's something called Arabia, just the concept of Arabia, while you have a few of the subjects, understand the concept. He basically had built that whole entire mentality of Arabs to begin with. As Arab unity, as an Arab type of cultural identity. What he was trying to establish was something with a mentality along the Greeks, back in the Greek city-states. Unfortunately, the modern world doesn't function on city-state levels anymore. Right? So you can't actually, what he pulled off was amazing, but it was never going to hold. So,
well, I think that's a good spot for us to end, because there's a lot more to talk about when the borders start to be drawn up. We'll do that after we speak on the entirety of the war. But thank you, everybody, for coming out. Like I said, we'll be back on tomorrow. Good night, good luck, and go ahead and end it, Farty, since you're in control today.